After only a few days of gameplay, Sifu already feels like one of the finest games on PlayStation 5, and by extension, PlayStation 4. Yes, like the lion's share of Sony's, quote, exclusives, Sloclap's Sifu is making a cross-generation appearance in the console space, and has landed on the Epic Games Store as well. While I'm awaiting the next true PS5 exclusive with bated breath, Sifu is more than just some stopgap on my next generation system, it's a striking kung fu action title with some absolutely sweaty mechanics. Yeah, Sifu is hard, like, very hard. While the game is short in theory, reaching the point where I could blaze through it is going to take more time than our busy February is going to allow. Nonetheless, if I'm going to beat Sifu, I'm going to need to stick with it. This is not a game that can be jumped in and out of. It's precise in both its combos and its rules, operating fairly within the confines of both. Every death in Sifu is 100% my fault, which is both a sign of great game design and a point of endless frustration as I lack a clear scapegoat for my shaky skills which I don't want to address. But this is a game that empowers me to push on and learn the nuances of both my offensive and defensive options. I'm no beat 'em up or fighting game expert by any stretch, which is putting quite the barrier between myself and that mechanical improvement. Still, I'm determined to see the credits here. There's just a wonderful flow to everything that makes even a novice like me feel like a stone cold badass, particularly with the DualSense pulsing along to the rhythm of the environmental mayhem around me. A perfect parry into a cinematic takedown never fails to impress, and chaining these together while clearing out rooms of foot soldiers is an unceasingly kinetic gameplay loop. All this action is contextualized within a clever time loop structure. While I've yet to beat the game and unravel the full scope of the narrative, the essence is this. When you die, you get exponentially older. The character visually ages in-game, gaining new buffs and weaknesses with each passing decade from their 20s until their 70s when they eventually die for good. At that point, you can restart the loop, or try to push on in your 70s on a single life. Sifu is actually far more generous with those restarts than I expected, allowing players to jump back into the action from their most recently unlocked stage, the caveat being that you start there at the age that you entered it. So, if you make it to the third stage at age 50, you can then start back there at age 50. Or you can return to the first stage at age 20 and try to reach stage 3 by, say, 35 years old with new power-ups and moves instead. It's a clever approach to dynamic difficulty and a novel subversion of the time loop-driven structure that I expected out of the game. Now, why did I have any expectations for Sifu's time loop structure in the first place? Well, that's because this is, funnily enough, the third PlayStation-backed game in the past year to adopt some sort of looping structure. PlayStation-backed feels like the most apt term here, as the three games in question, Returnal, Deathloop, and now Sifu, are all some shade of exclusive. Returnal is a true PS5 exclusive, Deathloop launched on PS5 and PC, and it's also now a circumspect Xbox game thanks to the Bethesda deal, by the way, and Sifu we already discussed. It's important to draw these distinctions for the purpose of defining terms. Nonetheless, each game was tantalizing enough for PlayStation to secure to some extent, and each operates in this time loop quasi-roguelike or full roguelike manner. It's peculiar to see this trio of titles all hit so close together. While the looping concept is certainly not new, as it's been explored on both AAA and indie scales before, we've suddenly found ourselves in the glut of like-minded experiences. And three of the most prominent ones are also three of PlayStation 5's most prominent releases. But they're far from the only time loop games on the market right now. If you look beyond the context of the PlayStation ecosystem, there are even more modern time loop titles like Loop Hero, 12 Minutes, and The Forgotten City, which all hit last year with the same base level concept. Now, while each game listed does approach its time loop differently, there's a narrative and structural continuity here that connects these titles into something of a subgenre. When we look at just those PlayStation titles again, Returnal, Deathloop, and Sifu, we can establish a spectrum from Returnal to Deathloop. The former is incredibly punishing and incredibly roguelike. You land on Atropos, you shoot your way through as many biomes as you can, and when you die, the screen goes black. Then, you land on Atropos, you shoot your way through as many biomes as you can, and when you die, the screen goes black. Then, you land on Atropos, you get the idea. It's a punishing, brilliant game. Deathloop's brilliance is a bit different. Its time loop is closer in style to perhaps the subgenre's most famous game, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The loop here is a piece of a larger puzzle that you use to learn more about the environments, building a timetable of events that you can synchronize to maximize your progress. In the case of Deathloop, that progress takes the form of successful assassinations. It's a much less linear time loop than Returnal, and one that feels a lot less punishing and repetitious as a result. Sifu lands somewhere in the middle, taking the demanding mechanics of Returnal and placing them in a structure that feels a bit more exploratory and non-linear like Deathloop. You can track pretty much any time loop game along this continuity, and plotting those is an exercise that we're seemingly participating in more and more as of late. Perhaps it's becoming a bit less special too. We all love a good time loop, whether in games or in cinema, but it's quickly becoming something of an archetype, robbing the concept of its luster. This all begs a central question: why are there so many? Well, I don't know. However, if I had to hazard a guess, it would be because the time loop structure allows for the seamless integration of roguelike elements into AAA level productions. The roguelike has become far more than a niche PC genre thanks to the indie market, with titles like Dead Cells and many others finding massive success through procedural generation. This wildfire lucrative design trend is one that tracks very nicely with the concept of the constantly repeating time loop. Roguelike and time loop are quickly becoming the peanut butter and jelly of game design buzzwords, and given the popularity of the former, the latter just makes sense. On Sony's side, densely designed, compact time loops allow for short games to be stretched into much longer ones. In the era where Techland advertises that Dying Light 2 takes 500 hours to complete as a selling point, a 5 to 6 hour linear Returnal is a very tough sell. A 5 to 6 hour Returnal wrapped in a roguelite time loop that might take dozens of hours to complete though? That's a clever proposition. In many ways, this is very much a return to an older, arcade-influenced design philosophy wherein demanding mechanics expand playtime, but here those mechanics are cushioned by a narrative structure that justifies them. Just some food for thought. It's possible that my theories on why time loops are so popular are completely wrong, but it's plain to see that such a trend has materialized. Perhaps you just view its underlying motivations differently. If you do, drop a comment below to let us know what you make of this seemingly resurgent subgenre. Stay tuned to Boss Level Gamer for more on Sifu and everything else the industry has to offer. Talk to you later.